Hi, and welcome to Terribly Fun Films. Today, we are continuing the Dragon Con countdown with the movie that actually spurned on the idea to do this. I know it might sound weird that the Scarehouse of all titles is what did this, but when I was looking up who was going to be there before they announced one of the bigger names, people announced it seemed were what seems like the entire cast of Wynonna Earp is going to be there. And I'm looking them up on IMDb, all that jazz, and I come across Catherine Burrell, and I type her name in, and I see she's in this movie called The Scarehouse. I'm reading about it. It sounds like the perfect kind of thing I'd review for this channel. I'm trying to track it down, and I eventually do, to Parade Deck Films. Parade Deck Films is, of course, the production company that I bought every single title of theirs I could for $65 at the time. I have a Nerd Show and Tell dedicated to them. So I thought it'd be fun to do this title to tie into Dragon Con. And then more people were getting added who had cheesy movies or movies I thought would be a good fit for my channel for reviews. I was like, alright, let's keep this going. So that's how that happened. But that's a history lesson you probably didn't care about. How is the actual movie The Scarehouse? Let's find out. As you've probably already guessed, The Scarehouse takes place in, well, a haunted house. And we see a line of paying customers gathered up to get inside. While we see that happening, we're cutting between the two people running the actual haunted house. And there's a special entrance just for the sisters of a particular sorority. The two people running the haunted house are using it to get utter and absolute revenge on their former sorority sisters for them winding up in prison over an accidental death that they were kind of forced into. It's not really a spoiler, as you learn 20 to 30 minutes in that this is because they were in jail and because a person accidentally died. I will leave the rest of the plot, though, out there and not go into too much detail as to not spoil who, how, why. Written and directed by Gavin Michael Booth, based on the story by him and his wife Sarah Booth, who is one of the main actors in the film. And you can absolutely tell that even when there are some flaws in the film, which I'll get to in a little bit, this isn't very much a labor of love. It comes from these people deciding on the story and thinking of the best way to tell it and deciding that they're the only ones who could tell it properly. And when something like that happens, you either get something so ridiculous, so awful, so gobsmackingly absurd, you get something like The Room, or you get something that's getting a ton of praise on the horror indie B-movie circuit that is getting more and more well known and is currently back ordered on the production studio's website, which is why it has taken so long for me to get to this review, as I had to wait for the movie to arrive. How ridiculous is that? And it's really not hard to see why this is so popular. There are a few small flaws, but for the most part, the film's really good. Much like one of my favorite movies from 2016, Don't Breathe, Scarehouse does a great deal of switching, turning, and twisting who you empathize, feel for, and sympathize with at any given moment. The writing in that regard is brilliant, because when we first are introduced to Corey and Elena, the two people running the Scarehouse getting their revenge, They just seem like they're running the Scarehouse, getting ready, amped up for the paying customers, making sure everything's running properly. And then we see the special entrance, and the first girl walks in. And they knock her out. They knock her unconscious. And they start torturing her. They're like, okay, well, they were fun-loving, and now they seem kind of crazy. Kind of demented. Because we don't really know too much yet about anything going on. Then, as it progresses, and we find out more and more, we actually aren't just feeling bad for the people they are torturing. We start feeling really bad for them. And there's one character in particular that you really want to see get her comeuppance, specifically at the hands of Corey and Elena, and that is deliciously clever in how the movie handles that, in terms of making you go, they're hurting people, but the reason they're doing it is not exactly noble, but 100% understandable, and if you were in their shoes, you'd probably be doing the same thing. And I think the movie gets a lot of mileage out of that, which is good, as some of the dialogue sounds a bit forced, more specifically in the things that happened 2 years ago, the sort of pseudo found footage stuff that's interspersed throughout the film. It kind of sounds like somebody's idea of how sorority sisters talk, and not actual human beings. The present day stuff sounds much better, much more realistic, much more natural. But the sort of head sorority sister, Katrina, just kind of yells at everybody and bosses them around and doesn't really have a personality outside of that in those sections. So she sounds hollow, so it doesn't quite work there in terms of why people listen to her, as the sorority hierarchy isn't set up very well within the film. That is a minor issue, given the really strong characterizations, the really interesting turn at the end, and that sort of thing. I did say there's a small flaw, and closer to the end, and there's a character who clearly knows martial arts that they're trying to get revenge on. They're able to trap her in a basement. Corey then traps a really drunk guy who wandered through the wrong door at the Scarehouse in the basement with him, and doesn't bother to make sure she properly latches the door behind her, so that character is not the boy, but the one they're trying to get revenge on, is able to escape. And that seems very much unlike the character of Corey. Had Elena did it, it would have made more sense in terms of that kind of a thing. Elena really just wants to scare them and make them kind of feel a small taste of what they went through for 2 years. Corey is very much the one who wants deathly revenge. So that oversight is a little bit odd. However, it's very minor and it doesn't really hurt the film in any major way. It's just a small character inconsistency I noticed while watching. Booth's direction is also top notch. The opening scenes of wandering through the haunted house, seeing Elena and Corey get it ready to be open to the public and for their victims, is a really great way of getting the layout of the building, understanding what these two are looking for. Even when we don't really know the story, we know they're out for something very specific. We know they're waiting for very specific people to show up. They are like, oh, we invited these people, and they're double checking that these people got invited, that they sent out these things, that sort of thing. And it's a really great introduction to them, what they want, and the Scarehouse. And the movie never really lets go. Basically, once the first sorority sister shows up and things get amped up and the tension gets taken to the next level, it is a very by-your-throat film, and the movie feels very visceral and intense thanks to the hard-hitting directing. And, of course, it wouldn't be that without the amazing, amazing cinematography from Ian McMillan. It's so good. The movie really does only take place in one location, excluding the footage from 2 years ago. But each room in the Scarehouse is lit a little bit differently, has different themes, obviously, and it all looks really cool. The sequence that involves a powdered acid that looks really cool when it first comes up in the air. Helping that a lot is the editing, also by Gavin Michael Booth. I was not kidding when I said this was clearly a labor of love for the two Booths involved, because the editing is equally as good, just as intense, just as interesting. I will say, when we first cut from the footage from 2 years ago, which is how the movie opens up, to now, I was a little taken back. I wasn't expecting that, as I knew very little about the plot going in. But that's a very minor complaint, and much more so what I was expecting versus any actual issue with the editing. Just as a side note, I really don't talk about the casting directors all that much, but I think it should be noted that Sarah Booth, who co-stars, storied the film, was the casting director, and that's kind of interesting. The movie has a lot of gore in it. Again, they are torturing these sorority sisters, banging their heads against mirrors so they get shards stuck in their faces to pull them out, breaking limbs, taking out breast implants. In that regard, the special effects and the makeup are really, really good. The makeup outside of that is very subtle and very realistic. So it's also quite good, but in a very different way. It's not like the Hunger Games and the Capitol, the characters are all crazy looking. It's much more subtle than that, but it's still very natural, fits each character well, and it works. I just don't know if people will notice that as much as the really great gore effects. So I wanted to point that out there. The art directing and production design by Kelly Camille, Sarah Steele, Kristen Kalababa, Allison Millard, and Jeremy Shell. Really fantastic. The Scarehouse looks awesome. The lighting, the sets, the layout of it all is fantastic. And again, because so much of the movie takes place in the Scarehouse, different rooms though it may be, you really needed to feel like so much care and thought was put into this by these two people getting their revenge, and I think they get that across early on, and it really, the titular Scarehouse is very much a character unto itself, and that's a really good thing. Adrian Ellis's score is good. Yeah, it's good. No complaints. I don't remember a ton of it, so there's something to be said for being unmemorable, but it definitely fit whichever scene happened to be on the screen at the time. Playing Corey, as you've heard me mention a little bit, is Sarah Booth. Sarah Booth is married to the director, and again, they came up with the story together. Sarah Booth is perhaps best known for actually other genre things. She was on Helix. She was on American Horror Story. So I expect people will know that name. She is great here. Just fantastic. Really intense, really engaging, and her desperate need for revenge. Not want. She plays it as a pathological desire to fuck with these people's lives, and it comes across every scene. She not to compromise. She doesn't want to just scare them. She needs them to feel everything she felt for 2 years. It's crazy. Playing the other pariah of the sorority sisters, Elena is Kimberly Sue Murray, and she's also really great. She's got more of a conscience than the character of Corey. She's out there solely to get these people to understand how they fucked up their lives. She doesn't necessarily want this to end in death, and her conflict plays out very interestingly, and if the actress wasn't able to make us like her and convey that properly, this whole movie would have fallen the fuck apart. being the person to have started this entire Dragon Con countdown, the person who introduced me to this movie, yada yada, Catherine Burrell doesn't really show up in any major capacity till over halfway into the film. We do see her in the stuff shot 2 years ago, but she comes in as sort of surprise for Elena that Corey's had locked in the Scarehouse for about 5 days when we are fully introduced to the character. And the character of Jacqueline is hardcore Christian. So a lot of her dialogue is her spouting off Bible verses or prayers or trying to justify her actions to her two captors and tormentors. And I think it works fantastically. She's really good. She's kind of creepier in her own way than our two ostensible leads in this sheer dedication to just saying these lines. Playing the sorority sister of Emily is Danny Barker, and she probably gives my least favorite performance in the film. She's alright. The big thing on her end is I don't buy her in the torture scenes. She sounds more rushed than tortured. She sounds more put upon than literally life and death situation. It's an okay performance, but compared to everybody else in the movie, it does not hold a candle to them. Tegan Vicines plays Shelby, another of the sorority sisters, and she's really good. She's one of the more empathetic sisters that you really do feel like was kind of forced into something she didn't necessarily want to go along with. And while it's there in the writing a little bit, a lot of that stems from the acting, because you need to be able to believe her in order to buy it because of later revelations that I will not reveal. Again, you should check it out. Emily Alato plays Katrina, and she's pretty good as well. Pretty much outside of actress Danny Barker, as I've already mentioned, I think all the sorority sisters, all the actresses, Tegan Zazzini, Emily Alato, Jennifer Miller, and Ivana Kingston do a really good job. They all bring equal amounts of sympathy, horror, a little bit of malice in terms of what the audience may feel for them and that sort of thing to their roles in a really unique, engaging way. Finally, the only other major player I haven't mentioned is Brandon Phillips, played by Brad Everett. He is the one who dies. So he doesn't have a huge role, but in his small, very drunken role, he's good, appropriately hateable, but you also feel kind of bad for him when what happens happens. The Scarehouse might sound like torture porn to you, and I could understand why you would think that. But I promise you, it's able to transcend that label into something creepy, interesting, fairly clever, although some of the attempts at comedy don't totally pan out. The characters are engaging. The plot's engaging. The twists closer to the end of the film are very well thought out. They make total sense for the characters. Again, minus the whole thing with the basement door. And that works out very nicely. If you haven't seen The Scarehouse, I definitely think you should check it out. Presuming you're into fairly gruesome torture revenge films. Because this is hardcore horror, and it works in that regard. It's creepy, it's intense, there are some really good gore effects going on, and I think that's all really great stuff, because it's well edited, it's well directed, it's mostly well acted. As always, thank you for watching. I've been your host, Bobby, and I'll see you next time.